wrestling heels Baker Mayfield is most like? This question is actually one I posed on Twitter to my Twitter followers and other folks who saw my tweet, and I'm going to feature some of your answers to that question. Agree with some of them, disagree with others. You can come up with one, but we're going to start in between. I'm going to put those tweets in there, but for now, we're going to talk about wrestling heels, wrestling villains that my man Baker Mayfield is most like in light of his recent shenanigans of planting the flag at Ohio State, asking Baker, who's your daddy, and most notably and recently, grabbing his crotch and shaking it at the Kansas sideline, which is putting him in sort of a wrestling heel Hall of Fame because, well, he's just that good and he's backing it up. We're going to get into those things after the bumper. If you're new to my channel, this is your first time here, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, because I upload a video every single day. It's always OU related, college football related, sports related. Also, shout out to Hot Rod, Roddy Piper. He was my man growing up, because that's what we get into. All right, bumper.
Just snap the damn ball, RJ.
So the first wrestling heel Baker Mayfield is most like has to be the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Why? Because who doesn't like the guy with all the money and wants to tell you about how he has all the money? And why is Baker Mayfield like Ted DiBiase? Well, my man dresses fly. He talks a good gab. He has all the skills, and it has no qualms about telling you he has all the skills. So Ted DiBiase is also the kind of guy who would stuff cash into other people's mouths just because he had that much money. He would dress in glittery suits, and he had the audacity to wear a mullet and a beard at the same time. While I don't accuse Baker Mayfield of wearing a mullet and a beard at the same time, he did have that Mexi stash that did not suit him, but we just didn't say anything because Baker's our guy. And notably, Ted DiBiase once offered a kid $500 if he could bounce a basketball 15 times, and after 14 bounces, kicked the ball away from the child. And then had the audacity to look directly at the child and say, if you don't do the job right, you don't get paid. Which is the most Ted DiBiase thing ever. The next wrestling heel on the list that Baker Mayfield is most like is Chris Jericho. Why? Well, Chris Jericho could be kind of insufferable on just general principle, but mostly because Chris Jericho was famous for The List. And you know, my favorite segment of Chris Jericho pulling out The List was when he had all these things to say about Mick Foley that turned into all these things to say about everybody watching the broadcast and in the arena who he called stupid people. Now, I'm not saying that Baker Mayfield calls people stupid on a regular, but he does have a list, and he does keep a list of haters in his phone. So yeah, he's got some Chris Jericho in him. Plus, I wouldn't mind seeing Baker Mayfield host his own radio show from time to time, kind of like Chris Jericho. So the next wrestling heel on the list that Baker Mayfield has to be most like is my man, Roddy Piper. Hot Rod in the house. Why? Well, Roddy Piper had this really great way of being unlikable and yet the most unlikable, likable villain of all time. Also the kind of guy that could crack a coconut over your head. He cracked a coconut over the head of Jimmy Snooker and kicked Cyndi Lauper in the face. Also, he's just the kind of man who feels like he could pull off a kilt in a wrestling room. Also, They Lived is one of the greatest movies of all time, simply because I have come to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. It's one of the greatest lines of all time. I don't care that it wasn't said in a wrestling context. I only care that it was said, and it was said by my man, Hot Rod, Roddy Piper. So you might be asking at this point, how is Baker Mayfield like Roddy Piper? Well, Baker Mayfield has the ability to deliver one-liners in the same manner that Roddy Piper did. Where there's the "they live" line that I just quoted to you and probably is going to get flagged by YouTube, there's also Baker Mayfield saying to Kansas fans, you have one win, stick to basketball. There's also Baker Mayfield saying, you forgot who daddy is, it's time for me to spank you. Baker Mayfield is the college football one-line quote machine like my man, Roddy Piper. So the next wrestling heel that Baker Mayfield must be most like is my man, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Woo! Now you know from previous videos that I have a special place in my heart, a special affinity for my man, Ric Flair. Because, man, I love me some Ric Flair. I went around Stillwater impersonating Ric Flair as Nature Boy. You know, B.O.I. But Ric Flair basically was the NWA World Champion for the entirety of the 80s, and mostly because, well, he was just good enough to keep the belt. Now, how is Baker Mayfield like Ric Flair? Well, there's so many people around college football that would love to see Baker get his butt kicked, but just can't handle it. They can't beat him. Kansas didn't want to shake his hand. Got mollywopped 41-3. Everybody wants a piece of Baker Mayfield, but everybody's biting off a piece that they can't chew. So next on this list is not one wrestler, but a collection of wrestlers known as the Black and White, the New World Order, the NWO, complete with Hollywood Hogan, Kevin Nash, and my man, Razor Ramon. Now look, they came along to WCW and destroyed it. They dismantled it. Hollywood Hogan went a little too far with the beard, and he just, you know, when you've been Hulk Hogan for so long, you gotta go a little over the top to sell Hollywood Hogan. I get it, but there was the skunk trail down your beard, Hulk, just didn't do it for me, dog. Like, you were just characters at that point. But the NWO itself was like everywhere. It was all over everything. And its downfall ended up being too many folks on the bandwagon. Like, when you bring in Sting, and all of a sudden the WCW locker room is all encompassing of just NWO dudes, then nobody's NWO, you know? And I think Baker's most like this with his Heisman campaign, where, you know, for the first 2 years that he was at OU, everybody was like, oh no, he's good, we'll give him a Heisman vote. And now it's like, oh my God, Baker Mayfield is the greatest thing of all time, let me get on the bandwagon. No, there's no more room on the bandwagon for posers. And yet, the bandwagon might be overrun just like NWO was overrun. So the wrestling heel Baker Mayfield is most like is probably the #1 wrestling heel of all time. The one man, our man, JR, Jim Ross called Satan, is Mr. McMahon. Vince McMahon drugged his wife. Look, man, there's nobody that was more hated in wrestling than Vince McMahon. But it's also because wrestling belonged to Vince McMahon. It was his. Like, he still owns it. It just belonged to him. He bought it. He literally bought wrestling. He's bought it all. It belongs to him. That's how Baker Mayfield is most like Vince McMahon. College football belongs to Baker Mayfield. Seriously, try to take college football from Baker Mayfield in 2017. You can't. You can't. It belongs to him. The Heisman has effectively been given to him in November. They don't give it till December, but they're making an exemption for Baker Mayfield because he owns college football. So those are the folks I believe Baker Mayfield is most like when we're talking about wrestling heels, the greatest wrestling heels of all time, and how Baker Mayfield is most like them. Let's see what you had to say about the greatest wrestling heels of all time and the one that Baker is most like. So one of the ones that I've seen on the list a lot was Mr. Perfect, who of all things was thankful for being absolutely perfect. But with his chubby cheeks and his double chin, I could only say that Mr. Perfect is only perfect in the eyes of his mother. So there's a lot of people who are on this bandwagon of D-Generation X, and I get it, right? Because of the whole, you know, suck it move and whatnot. I see it, especially in light of the Kansas incident. But for me, DX was kind of a caricature of NWO, and I wasn't really that lit for it. I mean, I was lit for the Heartbreak Kid, but for other reasons other than DX. Also, I was never a fan of Triple H, even though Triple H is a great heel. I can't ride for a dude who nearly got somebody killed. Like in real life. I'm cool. And plus, he runs wrestling now. Isn't that weird? Triple H runs wrestling? Alright, so the reason that I don't agree with the Heartbreak Kid reference is specifically because the Heartbreak Kid is a good guy. there's a lot of people that like Heartbreak Kid. Although there's many of us who would like to see Baker just do the stomping to the Sweet Chin music, even if it doesn't go with the flying sidekick, I would still like to see him stomp, stomp, stomp on third down and long, and then complete a pass to Hollywood Brown that goes for 70 yards. That'd be amazing. Matter of fact, Baker, make that happen. I'd love to see that, please. I've also seen Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock mentioned as possible wrestling heels that are likable to Baker Mayfield. I don't agree with this because, well, Stone Cold Steve Austin was never a heel. He was always a good dude. He was a good dude who's also kind of sort of a drunk, but, you know, we dig that in Oklahoma. I don't agree with The Rock, although I will say that The Rock is probably the only wrestler that can keep up with Baker in the organic one-liners and the classic trolling of whoever it is you're talking to. I have been known to do a Rock impersonation on this channel from time to time. I encourage you to go find it because, well, it's one of my favorites. I think those of you that picked up on Stone Cold Steve Austin and Heartbreak Kid, I think those of you that picked Stone Cold Steve Austin and most notably Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, don't really get the idea of what a wrestling heel is. You get with the, you know, and the John Cena reference. I mean, these are good guys. These are not wrestling heels. I was specifically asking for wrestling heels, but I get it. These are inspired. I like some of these. I really do like some of these. Like Mr. Perfect, I kind of get it, even though Mr. Perfect had a double chin and weird cheeks. Also, miss me with your curly blonde hair, dog. Anyway, that's it for me. If you like the videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you tomorrow. Deuces.